Today is the season finale of Healing Power Growth's first season, and I have with me the world-renowned scientist and researcher, Dr. Stephen Porges, who authored Polyvagal Theory and is co-founder of the Polyvagal Institute, and the renowned Deb Dana, consultant, clinician, and translator of Polyvagal Theory, and also co-founder of the Polyvagal Institute. Stay tuned. Today's going to blow your mind.
You are two of the loveliest, warmest people. And I feel so grateful and so lucky that I get to spend this time with you right now. This is the last episode of Healing Power Growth's first season. And to have the honor of having two of the most wonderful nervous systems that I know sitting in front of me is wonderful. So thank you. Thank you for that. To just kind of now put this in context, because there are so many women that are listening that really the goal is to start a dialogue and an understanding among all of us to connect the dots and understand and gain autonomy with our health and our well-being in a way that so many women are struggling with all of these symptoms, right? That we're medicating, we're dealing with the symptoms, and I say, when you get to the root, you can pull out the weeds. To start this, let me just say, Dr. Porges, or ask Dr. Porges, what and where is the vagus nerve?
Well, you see, I'm going to deflect that because we start thinking of the nerve as the doer, and we've got to be really careful. Think of it as literally a communication conduit between the brainstem and the visceral organs. And it says it's primarily picking up sensations from our organs. So it's coming off the back of our brainstem and going down our neck, and then it goes to all these organs. It's symmetrical. It's going from both sides. And it's going, has two different major branches, one that deals with the organs above the diaphragm and one that deals with organs below the diaphragm. When we start talking about medical symptoms, you're going to see that many of them are from organs below the diaphragm: gut issues, fertility or sexual function issues, breathing issues. And then above the diaphragm is going to be the heart and your lungs. And then that vagus also impacts and regulates your vocalizations. So the intonation of your voice is really telling you how the vagus is regulating the rest of your organs. So the bottom line is, if you think of it as this wonderful superhighway, bidirectional superhighway connecting your organs with the brain, the lower part of the brain, and from there that information literally is being percolating upward, and our cortex interprets it and we feel good and safe. Or when we have symptoms, what we're really saying is our viscera is detecting a violation or disruption of homeostatic function. We're no longer serving health, growth, and restoration. And so you have symptoms coming up. Now, I think what you're really going to start directing me towards is many people have symptoms, but they don't really have pathophysiology. They go in and they can't get a diagnosis. They just have symptoms. And those symptoms from a polyvagal perspective are the product of the nervous system. They're not the product of pathophysiology yet. They're a product of the nervous system no longer supporting health, growth, and restoration. And medicine, now we get into the whole world of medicine in terms of how medical treatments are literally offered. Basically, there's a belief that symptoms are used to create diagnosis. Diagnosis have pathophysiology, and the pathophysiology has genetic antecedents. Pathophysiology is really disease or injury to your end organ, to the organ itself. So you have, let's say, a gut problem, and you go and they do a biopsy or they do other types of assessments, and they say there's nothing wrong with you. But you say, I still have all these symptoms. They say, well, that's something else. You're probably under a lot of stress, or it's in your head. See a psychiatrist. Now, that's because they don't have toolkits to measure neuroregulation. If they were, quote, more sophisticated, and we don't want to blame the physician, they don't have tools and they weren't taught about the neuroregulation of the organs that you're going to see them about. If they had the tools, they would see that the neuroregulation of the organ is changing, meaning that the rhythms of the gut have changed when you have irritable bowel or gut problems. The rhythms of the heart change when you start having cardiovascular disorders. So the body is literally responding to these disruptors, but the physician doesn't understand that other than the end organ, the organ that they're specializing in, like a cardiologist, a hepatologist, a gastroenterologist, whatever specialty you're running to get information about your symptoms, is all focused on the organ itself. And that organ might not be diseased or have sufficient disruption. That's the word pathophysiology. And so that they just say, I don't see anything. You must be fine by exclusion, because they don't know about the neuroregulation. And that's where the vagus comes in. The vagus is really this bidirectional highway between that organ and the brain.
If you can explain what the vagus nerve does and why should we care about it, or why should we care for it?
It's really a collection of wires. Literally, think of it that way. And we don't, when our light goes on, we plug our lamp into the outlet. We don't say, tell me about the wire. And that's in a sense what you're asking me. The answer is the information that regulates our organs is coming through that wire. If that information gets distorted, and that's where at the source where the information is coming, the end organ starts to reflect let's say a pathology. It reflects symptoms. So the vagus is really this wonderful cable, this conduit that enables the brain to help regulate the organs, but more importantly than that, it enables the brain to monitor the organ. So the monitoring of the organ is really as important as the regulation of it, because the regulation of the organ is dependent upon what the organ is sending to the brain. And that's called a feedback loop. And so in the healthy individual, when the organ starts showing distress, that signal goes up to the brainstem, and the brainstem now does something different in regulating the organ. But when we have symptoms, what do? We try to block the symptoms. We try to treat the symptom, as opposed to, as you said in your initial thing, not the root cause. The root cause of the problem is really the regulation of the organ in general. There can be cases of injury and disease specific to the tissue. And actually, like with hearts, like atopic beats or various anomalies in terms of how the heart functions, those are things that can be dealt with at the level of the organ and not the level of the nervous system. But the world we live in, we are really confronted with this as generalized symptoms of nervous systems under threat.
Can you explain what polyvagal theory is in an approachable way, and what makes it so groundbreaking?
Let's let Deb, because Deb has language that people can understand.
Oh, Steve, you do it beautifully too. But when I introduce people or invite people to begin to befriend their nervous system, I talk about polyvagal theory and being the theory of the nervous system, the theory that tells us how we're human, right? And polyvagal theory took the old way of thinking about the nervous system as just parasympathetic and sympathetic. And through Steve's brilliant work, parasympathetic became ventral dorsal. So connect, engage, safe, organized, ready to be in the world, regulated. Dorsal, in survival, disconnect, disappear, collapse, shut down. And then sympathetic, which in survival we all know is that fight, flight. And what polyvagal theory does is it gives us a predictable order for how we move through these states, from regulated and ready, ventral, to sympathetic, fight, flight, to dorsal, disconnect, disappear. And for moving through the world, it is so lovely to understand that I have a predictable way of knowing where I am and where I might be heading next. So that's one of the organizing principles that polyvagal theory brings us. That's hierarchy. Two others, and then to me, we understand polyvagal theory in my clinical way, in my human social worker way. Neuroception, which is how the nervous system takes in information and makes a judgment, safe or unsafe, right? And neuroception is using three pathways inside the body. in the environment around us and in the space between us. And those three pathways are always sending information, right? And then, as Steve said, that information is fed up to your brain, and your brain makes a story to make sense of what's going on and initiates an action. So that's neuroception. The third organizing principle is co-regulation. This biological imperative, as Steve says, that we all have to be connected to safe others, right? And that, I think, is one of the big challenges in the world today, to find ways to be connected safely to others, right? And when we don't have that, we depend on navigating the world on our own, and we can't really fully experience well-being, because we're missing that piece that is essential to living a life of well-being. So there you go. And you can see, when you think about these three basics, how important it is to connect to your nervous system, because that's where your lived experience begins. It doesn't begin in your brain. It begins in your body. And most of us are not taught how to befriend that. So that's the brilliant work that Steve has created, that's allowed the rest of us to sort of dive into understanding.
I do really appreciate that, because I think so much we are taught to not tolerate anything that's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So as soon as we're upset, we shouldn't be upset. As soon as we have, any kind of feeling or emotion, it's about not sitting there. And so one of the things that I appreciate about this theory and about all of your work is that it's really, it is for, I say, this is for the woman, this is for everybody, but specifically, what I'm doing with Healing Power Growth, that this is for the woman who's ready to lean in and do uncomfortable work. But it's the most beautiful work that you can do, because it really brings you back into yourself, and creates a sense of an awareness, internally, and then just how we move through the world, like you said. And you had touched on the traffic light theory. Talk about that a little bit more, and how someone who is activated, how knowing what this is might give them a different perspective on how to handle things or what's going on, so that they have more agency in those moments.
Our physiological state affects our behavior and our perspective of the world. And this goes actually into your last point, Blair, and that is, the first step along this journey is the awareness that my physiological state, or your physiological state, has changed. And that's through my own introception, or that's awareness of my own bodily feelings. And continuing on what you were talking about, what is the strategy that many people, especially young women, go through? And that is depressing bodily feelings. Whether it's ingesting, don't eat, don't say things, don't do things, basically it's part of a strategy of numbness. And what that is, from a polyvagal perspective, it's literally turning off those feedback loops, interfering with the surveillance of the organs. And now you see the consequences is a lot of visceral or so-called psychosomatic or stress-related disorders. And the prevalence of that is greater in women, and it has a lot to do with how women are treated in our society. This is a discussion. My wife is a renowned scientist who discovered the important relationship between oxytocin and social behavior. And she's really quite, I wouldn't say a feminist, but she's very activated about sex differences. And I said, you really can't say that, because you really don't know whether these are causal by the culture creating a differential stress or demands. And so you have to be, in a sense, not say that they're gender or sex differences, but it's the treatment of people of different sexes. The whole idea is, and this is another metaphor that I like to use, when we are safe enough, we can become who we are. And I think that is really the beauty of being a human being cannot be expressed when we are in a state of constant fear. And just think about the educational and medical and social, political, and even religious context of utilizing fear to shape behavior. And in reality, the fear is limiting the felt sense of being a human.
And again, to your question, Blair, how do we lean in? Because as Steve said, we feel under threat so often. So how do we build the capacity to lean into that and not turn away from it, right? And the simple practice that I always begin with is notice and name what your nervous system, where it's taken you in this moment. Am I feeling safe and regulated? Am I feeling a bit of that, danger of fight, flight, or the disconnect of shutdown? So notice and name, and then tune in and turn toward and listen for just 20 seconds. And just listen in, and your nervous system, I've discovered, will give you information, right? And the nervous system loves it when you listen, so it doesn't have to yell so loud or take such extreme actions. So that simple practice, notice, name, tune in, turn toward, listen for 20 seconds, and then come back is the starting point, I think, of befriending, so that we don't want to turn toward and listen and then listen forever, because we'll get sucked down into the story of what's happening. But just sort of 20 seconds of getting the flavor of what's happening. And that's a practice. You repeat that over and over and over. Small moments during the day, you begin to come into connection with your nervous system.
The roots of that even go back to Viktor Frankl. And I actually had to reread that from, it's like decades ago when I read when I was in graduate school. But he says the space between the stimulus and the response is where free will occurs. So in a sense, you become aware of your reaction to the stimulus before you have the intentional motor behavior. You become aware, then you respond. And it's very difficult. So a lot of people utilize that trigger in their physiology as the motivation. It gives them energy and they act out.
It is hard to take a moment between stimulus and response. It's really hard. And so if we practice in the moments when you don't feel a lot, we get better at having the ability to take a breath in the moments when we are feeling a lot. And that's sort of that lean in, Blair, lean into the tiny moments, make a practice of learning to lean in. Yeah.
It always feels like a meditation to me, in that sense where meditation is about removing yourself from your thoughts so that you are able to watch it instead of being in it. And it's, kind of feels the same, so that you have the stimulus, that space in between that you're talking about creating is kind of what I always think about as the meditation in those seconds before you have the reaction, so that you can have a deliberate response to it and not.
Yeah, there's gradations about what people think is meditation. So sometimes it's really a top-down inhibition. And what you're saying is very consistent with my perspective, and actually with what we're developing now, which I was initially calling it polyvagal music, but it was literally triggering. The music was composed to have endogenous biological rhythms in the music itself, basically talking to the visceral organs and saying, come back, just go on these rhythmic voyages. And the interesting part is when you do that, you're on that voyage of that awareness of body, and you're not thinking about anything. You're just going. It's like the baby who's being rocked. But for the adult, the visualization I love to use is on a rubber raft in the ocean without any chance of falling off. But the waves are now moving you in this very slow way. And everyone knows what that feels like in their mind. But when you ask them, when's the last time you felt that? They may not be able to articulate an experience.
I love how, Steve, how you create all these pathways for us to connect with the nervous system in those ways. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Well, there's a real message underneath that, and that is in that state, You literally have turned off your hypervigilance and your skeletal motor system. You allow that body. Why? How could you turn off the skeletal motor? Well, if you're not under a state of threat, you can give it up. And you can't just tell a person, why are you defensive? There's no need. That doesn't work. It's like saying, why are you anxious? Oh, don't do that then if you're anxious. They'll find something else to do because their body is in that state. But getting the body, in a sense, to recognize these signals is just a beautiful way of getting the body into a state where you can do your work if you're a therapist or you're a friend. If you get the body out of this defensive mode, then you can actually start getting at those weeds.
Yeah, and my simple practices at the beginning are to help people just sort of bring curiosity to what's going on and be with whatever it is.
Yeah.
So the I often listen in, and I don't get to the raft floating in the ocean. I get somewhere else. I go, oh, that's good information for me, because
Yeah.
I think the nervous system is always trying to communicate with us. So
Yeah.
this is more of a, let me listen in and let me hear what it's telling me. Then I want to go to the raft.
Deb, can you talk to us about the relationship between unprocessed emotions and feelings and our physical and mental health? Do those unprocessed emotions and feelings transfer into physical symptoms, and what would be some examples of that?
Yeah, it's a great thing to think about, is we so often push things away, right? We unconsciously push things away, and sometimes we consciously push things away, and then they're stored. I like to tell people that your undigested, unresolved, unprocessed, whatever words you want to use, unintegrated trauma moments live in your sympathetic and dorsal survival states, right? And they come to life when a familiar cue comes into our world. We feel that come back again, and the story that was created back then comes alive again, which then creates messiness for us in our present day worlds. So it's interesting again to feel how what remains implicit gets stuck somewhere in our system. So the work that I've taken Steve's work into is bringing the implicit into explicit awareness so that we can work with it,
And
right?
implicit meaning subconscious.
Yeah, implicit is it's happening, but we don't recognize it's out of awareness. In therapy, I think, as well as many things in just regular life, when we bring it to explicit awareness, then we can do something with it. But if it's just operating below the level of my awareness, I have no way of changing it. I have no way of being in connection with it and changing it. I feel the headache. I feel the stomach problems. I feel the heart issues, but I have no way of connecting with and understanding what's stored there, right? Hence, I go to the doctor and I end up where Steve said, where they're treating the symptom of what they see, but they aren't treating what really
Root
is
cause.
underneath all that. Yeah.
The root cause. Yeah.
And I do believe, we've discovered there's many, many research studies, and we know as the nervous system becomes more regulated, all those symptoms begin to reduce or even resolve, right? And so in my work with trauma survivors, as I say, they come for a reason. This is their presenting problem. And I say, could we put that aside? Could we put it over here? Because we can work here first, right? Work here. And then we're going to take that presenting problem back and put it here. It's going to be very different, right? So that's the paradigm shift in therapy that Steve's work has brought to us. Let's not work with the story of this problem you're bringing us. Let's work here.
You touched on something with trauma. I always say that there's two different definitions. There's big T and little t trauma. And the big T trauma I refer to as the catastrophic things that when someone says trauma, everyone goes to: the rape, the murder, the horrific things that happen. But those are things that not everyone can relate to. And so one of the things I think is important that I have a focus on creating a dialogue on are the little T traumas. And those are the things that I find that there's this kind of global collective among women where it's just dismissed of, I don't have trauma. I had a great life, or this was great, or that's just life. You know, like that, you don't get to hang your hat on that. That happens to everyone. And so by dismissing it, we don't have or don't allow ourselves that awareness piece that then allows us to start the healing. What I am so passionate about trying to connect is how those little T traumas, the things that we dismiss, the bullying on the playground, the parent with big emotions. I want women to hear from both of you that those little T traumas can actually be at the root of what causes all this other stuff. Yes.
I'm going to step in.
Please.
And I'm going to I don't want to be dismissive of the events that people experience, but it's not the events. The events are important. It's the response to the events. So this is really a disservice in the world of trauma, because it's really, the scales are all based on the events. And a lot of people are basically traumatized physiologically by being humiliated in public. And they don't hit any of those check lines, any of those boxes. And so they're dismissed. And so the issue is a greater respect for the person's reaction or feelings is really important, because even in my own research, so this is the interesting one, we use more traditional types of adversity history scales, but the predictive outcomes are really through whether or not their autonomic nervous system was retuned. So what it looks like is, trauma is not good. It's related to outcomes, but it goes through a path of a retuned autonomic nervous system that gets locked into a state of threat. And that pathway through autonomic reactivity is many times stronger than the direct pathway from the big T or little t, is what I'm saying. So we meet people who tell us their life stories, and we look at them and say, wow, how did you do that? And they look pretty, they function, they have families, they have careers, and you're just in awe. But the issue is, did their nervous system shut down? So I've met people who have been abducted for decades, or let's say 19 years, and I've been basically in awe of what this woman has been able to do. And I actually ended up writing a paper with her, and this is the one with Rebecca Bailey, and the woman's name is J.C. Dugard, and she was abducted from the age of 12 or 11 for 19 years. And we worked on a paper on appeasement, which was this ability of this unique nervous system, in this case hers, that was able to navigate in this very dangerous, complex world to enable that predator basically to like her, even though she hated the guy. And then she was accused of Stockholm Syndrome. Basically, it has to do with what the culture does.
And can you define what Stockholm Syndrome is?
Oh, that is, you fall in love with your captor. The idea is, can you be in an intimate situation with someone that you totally detest, that you're in almost a survival state? Well, polyvagal theory says in general, you're going to be like this or you're going to pass out. But what about the unique nervous system that can really maintain its control as to adapt in this very dangerous situation?
It's interesting to think of the daily life of women in the ways that not the big T traumas, but all the little ways that the nervous
or
system,
appeasement
Yep.
in the world that they're in.
Yep.
Abuse and appeasement,
Mhm.
and even in the workplace.
Yep. Yeah, so all the ways the nervous system has to manage all the cues of danger that are coming in. For many women, we wander through the world with an increased dysregulation of hypervigilance, on guard, need to manage. It's that drivenness of having to do all this, or in the state of sort of, I'm going through the motions, which to me is more of a dorsal. I'm doing it, but I'm not really here, and I'm not getting any nourishment out of it. And that comes not from a direct abuse, a direct life threat, or any of these things, but it just comes from all of the small ways. Our nervous system the demand on our nervous system is too big.
And that's something I want to flag to people listening, right? It's if you find yourself, if this is something that resonates where you think, oh my God, I'm constantly hypervigilant. I'm always on guard. I'm just kind of feel like I'm on that edge all the time, or I'm avoiding things, or whatever it is, that this is typically when we either don't address it, or we think we've got ADD or ADHD or something like that, and we're medicating it. And this is hello, we want to flag you. And this is the conversation to say, this is not about medication. This is about tapping into sitting with those uncomfortable feelings and figuring out where that comes from, because you can get to a place where you don't have the symptom anymore by sitting in that.
For me, I use a simple equation. There are cues of safety and cues of danger. And when the cues of safety outweigh the cues of danger, we feel regulated, ready, safe enough, organized enough. We experience that sense of nourishment and well-being. When that equation flips and the cues of danger outweigh the cues of safety, we then move out of regulation into some sort of survival energy. And that can happen so easily, so quickly.
And while you're alone.
While you're alone, absolutely, because something is happening inside, in the environment, or in a between. So it could even be the memory of a between experience I had. That neuroception is changing those cues all the time. And I think what we want to remember is when the cues of danger outweigh the cues of safety, and I begin to feel uneasy in some way, to the nervous system, that's traumatic. Trauma is when you get pulled into survival and get stuck there. It's not that you get pulled into survival, because we get dysregulated all the time, but we find our way back to regulation. But when we don't recognize the dysregulation, we then can't find our way back because we don't know we're not there.
That leads us perfectly into the question of how do we regulate the nervous system and the vagus nerve? What are some actionable steps for people listening that they can do to regulate?
Well, I mean, we can extrapolate from what Deb said, and basically sociality is a powerful neuroregulator. And many of the people who are, in a sense, having dysregulatory biobehavioral states, meaning that they're anxious and physiologically mobilized.
99% of the world, right?
Yeah, basically the strategy is to be more active, to be numb, to take drugs, to take medication, or just not to think of it, is what you were basically. It just creates more of these problems. The body, we evolved as a social species, which was when we are in these states, our go-to mechanism has been sociality with trusted others. And as we create communities that are not trusting communities, as we create cable news networks that are not sending signals of safety, as we create an environment that is very critical of others and has very limited compassion, and when we start thinking that compassion is literally a instrumental behavior and not a feeling that's shared with another, we're not understanding by our own biological feelings we're not understanding our body. And what I want to really say when you talk about the little T's, the little abuses, there's this, actually I'm going to quote Bessel, our body keeps the score. In a sense, there's a point in time where our nervous system starts to scream at us. And then we often don't listen, and we try to find strategies to dampen the message. And the part that both Deb and I are really, I would say, adamant and passionate about is you have to have a degree of awareness of what your body is screaming. And that has to be at least your starting point, the awareness. And I would say more than awareness, great respect for what your body has done for you and is doing by screaming at you.
It's a beautiful way to think about the wisdom of the nervous system, right?
Yeah.
To listen to it and see, and Steve was talking about the tiny moments that add up. I like to think that the tiny moments of okayness add up to, right?
Yeah.
And we forget that. We think we need to have a long, beautiful experience of goodness or safety or whatever. And those are lovely, but they don't happen that often for us. Right?
Mhm.
We can have
Yeah.
tiny moments of feeling connected, feeling, okay. And those begin to accumulate in your system and move you toward more of those moments, right?
So you're saying that to regulate the nervous system and the vagus nerve is really, it sounds like gratitude. And it sounds like something a very lovely woman refers to glimmers.
I mean, glimmers are really, I think that to me, they are the easiest path forward because, my work was always with complex trauma survivors who would think a moment of safety, forget it. No, no way. Right. But glimmers are these tiny moments that happen and they happen all the time. Right. And if you know that all you have to do is just recognize, come into connection with a tiny moment of this spark of something ventral, okay, safe, regulated, right? And maybe it is for, obviously my cat is certainly a bigger glimmer, but I'm sitting by a window. I look out the window. There's something happening out there in nature. Your smile, Blair, seeing Steve, and I love Steve's sparkling eyes, so tiny little things. And if we set an intention to find a glimmer as we move through our day, we will find it. It is there. And the thing that I want to just say as we're, been talking about glimmers here is that this is not a turning away from the suffering or the dysregulation or the pain. This is the nervous system is exquisitely able to hold the suffering and find the moments of regulation and safety. And I love that our biology does that for us, right? And the more we find the moments of safety and goodness, the more capacity we have to work with the suffering and the pain.
So Deb, you're really talking about self-compassion, which is really, this is the part when people feel that they've been wronged. It's very hard for them to get into a moment of basically feeling self-compassion, awareness of oneself, being in one's body, being alive. It's an interesting journey for many people. The issue with complex trauma and developmental traumas is that top-down glimmers or memories. Oh, glimmers are things that you really are experiencing or seeing at the moment.
In the moment.
But for many people, they are held together with positive memories from somewhere. And what those memories are being often in the arms of someone that they trusted and felt safe with. And the word I would use is even another social mammal.
You're right.
So the issue, and a lot of people like their dogs, cats, and horses for that reason. It's a trusting relationship. And when we get into trauma, the defining, I would say, almost the universal defining feature of it is violation of trust.
Yeah.
Especially in the developmental model or complex trauma. It's really profoundly disrupted because the people who were literally, I would say in charge, but had taken the oath to protect were the ones that violated.
Yeah. So, yeah, I just want to say these tiny moments when the world is okay, or, I hear a piece of music that, or I see, a bird.
Or Deb, you sit on the deck and share a cup of
I
coffee
sit on the
with me.
deck with you and share a cup of coffee. It's magical.
Yeah.
And those tiny moments are there. I mean, magical is there are all sorts of flavors of them. They can feel joyful, playful, curious, but they're the disconfirming moments to a nervous system that has lacked that. They're the moments that show there is something else possible. And I love that.
So what I'm hearing you say is look for when you feel activated and you feel like you need to regulate yourself. What I'm hearing you say is look for the glimmers. Look for something that makes you feel happy or calm or just in a different state.
I probably would say when you feel activated, look for something that gives you the capacity to learn from that activation. Listen to what's activating you, right? Because that's where the learning is. Is there's some cue of danger that has come in, and I'm curious about what that is. And maybe I can't do it in a moment. Maybe in the moment I need to grab a resource so that I have a bit more capacity.
Breathing is breath work.
Movement.
The important part is, let's say you get triggered, and that's what Deb is talking about. Do you then yell at the person who's trying to take care of you, which is frequent? Or do you realize that you got triggered and you now use the person who's with you for a hug? And these become awareness and then strategies. I use the term, when our body shifts state, we need to learn to navigate. In a sense, I almost say that, you need to move your body into a place where it can feel safer. It's it's one thing you do have agency of. You don't have to force yourself to be, except when you're on airplanes or things like that, you can't get off. But there are certain situations where you say, look, the party's too noisy, the restaurant's too noisy, I'm out of here, I had enough. You can be nice, and you can basically say, I'm taking care of my body now. A lot of people don't acknowledge that their body needs to be taken care of.
Can you give us some examples of how the vagus nerve affects us physically and emotionally?
Well, I think the way we want to think about it is we're literally giving permission to our body to be in a fight or flight state. And when we're under chronic threat, we basically have given our body that permission. And that's why you have fights, and that's why you have arguments, and that's why people aren't listening. Their bodies are in a state of fight flight. When the vagus is, at least the ventral vagus is on, we have a great degree of flexibility. We tolerate a lot more. We're interesting. We're engaging. We're caring. We're regulated. When we go through that sympathetic fight flight and we get overwhelmed, we just don't have enough energy, because fight flight is metabolically costly. It's a good defense system, but it can't last forever. The nervous system says you're depleted. And what's it going to do? Shut you down. And we'll use that dorsal vagus. But let's not minimize the importance of the dorsal vagus, because when we are safe, that dorsal vagus supports health, growth, and restoration. And when it has as its companion that social engagement system, we have moments of intimacy. We can immobilize without fear. So immobilization is not always a defense response. It's really a state in which we can heal and love. We can feel comfortable in the arms of another.
I think, Blair, for me, what I would encourage everybody to do would be create their own menu. So try things out that feel like, oh, that feels nourishing or resourcing, or brings a moment of happiness or a smile or connection or ease. And I, look for music you listen to, sounds you hear, smells you smell, things you touch, people you connect with, movements you make. Breath is both a lovely regulator. It's also very activating for many people. So play with breath. Is there a breath that brings that sense of ease? But create a menu that has lots of different choices, so that you can say, ooh, I need something. Go to my menu. Ooh, this I can try today.
I love that. There's, social media is so big now, right? Everybody's talking about the vagus nerve. Thank you both for being the ones that have created all this dialogue. What are the things that you've heard out in the world about regulating the vagus nerve that are just falsities that you would love to set the record straight on?
Well, I would say the strategy of biohacking or hacking the vagus is just not the right strategy. It's like something isn't working right. I need to fix it, without understanding why is your vagus not really working? Why is it not calming your body down? Well, the brainstem has interpreted the world as if it's a dangerous place. So the brainstem's going to fight all that feedback you're giving it with vagal nerve stimulation. So the part is, we have to understand that there is let's say, if it appears that your vagus isn't doing its job, like calming you, that's an important message. It's saying that your brain is seeing the world as a dangerous place. And if you now tell the body that it's not a dangerous place, sometimes the feedback from those visceral organs will be calming, and sometimes it may not. So in a sense, you're messing around with a system that has a very adaptive program. It is when you're under threat, the vagus goes for a vacation. And when you're safe, the vagus comes back and does its job. So if you want to enhance vagal activity, create signals of safety. And don't focus on the notion, I need a vagal nerve stimulator. The issue is signals of safety are profound. And this is really just watch a baby. And how do you calm the baby? With the intonation of the mother's voice. And how does Deb calm Buddy, her baby, with her voice and with her gestures? So social mammals know that intonation of voice is reassuring. It's a signal of safety. If you talk with low monotone, Buddy won't like you as much. and your kids will run away from you. The issue is we interpret these signals. They're profound. They're wired into us. So we have to understand the power of the signaling systems that we have before we say, screw the signaling systems. I want that nerve stimulator. It's easier. And we have to say, my role as a human being is signals of safety to others. So the take home that I have, and the message that I always like to say, we have one gift to give, and that's our accessibility. And because in signaling accessibility, we're signaling welcoming, we're signaling sociality.
I know we didn't talk about this before, but I have a question. Cold plunges. Is it about shocking this system, or is it about stressing the system?
Well, I don't like either
Either.
word. I love the word exercise the system.
Okay.
And so the issue is, in part, you are shocking it and you're dealing with recovery from the disruption. But some nervous systems don't take shock well.
I was just talking to some people about they were taking cold showers or cold plunge. And I said, my nervous system says unequivocally no. And I'm just going to listen to it.
So I will tell you what I do. Okay. So I have a back tilt, a swing.
Yes.
Okay. And I do back tilts. I do, 30 of them relatively rapidly, which are triggering the baroreceptors, which really trigger vagal activity. Now, I have a friend actually who's visiting, and he has AFibs and other cardiac arrhythmias. I say, you're not getting on this. Okay. The issue is, and it's not like I've been doing this for several years. So it's like I wouldn't tell someone to do it unless, in a sense, their cardiovascular fitness was good. But I am doing this because it's my, let's say, scientific hypothesis that way I don't take any blood pressure medicine, and I think that's pretty well for my age, and my blood pressure is, it's normal, it's high, it's normal because they kept lowering the guidelines every year, and so it's it's in the 120s over the high 70s, which isn't bad for a person my age. So I try to make sure that system has a degree of flexibility because it's neural and vascular. And if I challenge it rhythmically as a neural exercise, and that's the magic word here, not a shock, but as an exercise. So I'm triggering it, allowing it to recover. I'm triggering it, allowing it to recover, just like I would on a treadmill or elliptical, except I'm now doing it with posture. So I think the nervous system, including all the vagal systems, both the dorsal and the ventral, can deal with neural exercise. And this is really, I have an ongoing discussion with my vagal nerve stimulator colleagues, including my son, who has a patent and created a device as a vagal nerve stimulator. And that I see vagal nerve stimulators as prosthesis. I see the work that I do as neural exercises that create resilience and resource. So the acoustic stimulation I developed was always developed to build capacity. A vagal nerve stimulation is fixing something, it's putting something in that feedback loop that wasn't there.
I think if you ask your nervous system, if you get a no, listen to it. If you get a yes, great. If you get a maybe, that's where you want to stretch. Maybe. Oh, let me try it. Right? But I think we override the no because we think we should do something. And as soon as you think you should, you're in sympathetic survival. I should. So ask your nervous system, see what it tells you.
Dr. Porges, are there conditions, disorders, diseases, ailments, physical, mental, emotional, that doctors are commonly diagnosing that research shows could be improved or cured by addressing unprocessed emotions and trauma instead of taking a pill? And what are some of those diagnoses or labels, if so?
We know that a lot of diseases don't have, as I said earlier, pathophysiology. This is damage to the organ.
Will you explain for what pathophysiology is? Just
Patho, meaning pathology of the physiological organ. You could have kidney diabetes would be pathophysiology. Irritable bowel often, most frequently, does not have any pathophysiology. So you start finding out the most diagnosed disorders are really diagnoses that are in kind of a gray area, that they don't really have an assessment that shows a differentiation in the organ itself, but has a lot of symptoms. And those are really clustered into terms that are called functional disorders or medically unexplained disorders. And this is the gray area that internists and basically GPs don't really want to deal with, because they don't know what to do with it. In a sense, is it really in the person's head or not? And they can tend to be discussed as generalized stress disorders, or disorders of our lifestyle. And you hear that a lot in medicine. You need to work on your lifestyle. You need more social prescriptions, meaning interacting with more people. Loneliness is bad. All these things that they start to try to create, when in reality, it's the sociality. It's not bringing people into the other person's life. It's this ability to co-regulate with other. So what I'm saying is there's a misunderstanding of the causality. So the part that we really want to get to is we know enough to say that, quote, stressors or disruptions in our lifestyle create physiological changes. And now you're asking the question are those physiological changes, is there part of the rehabilitation to process memories or other psychological phenomena? And the answer is probably, because when you walk into basically people who work with trauma, many of the clients that are being treated have a whole array of what would be called medically unexplained symptoms. And when that trauma is processed, the symptoms start to dissipate and their lives become much more manageable.
We know that as people begin to feel more at home in their bodies and have ways of returning to that place of safety and regulation, once they dysregulate and come back, we know that they begin to have a different story about who they are, who the other people in the world are, and how the world works. And that really is I think, so powerful, so powerful.
Deb, the internal dialogue that so many of us women have is so toxic. It is just, we're just our own worst enemies. And does this have an effect on the vagus nerve, and how does that manifest?
Well, where we hear those critical voices when we are dysregulated. I do this practice, the story of 3 states, because your regulated ventral has a story. Your sympathetic fight, flight, survival has an anxious and angry story. And your dorsal disconnect collapse has a story of hopelessness. Those stories are always available to us at all times. But we're drawn to the survival stories, the self-critical, judging, shaming, blaming stories, or the hopeless, give up, nothing will ever change, because our nervous system has taken us into those states of activation, right? So the story of possibility, or okay enough, or, embodied in an okay way, or all those stories are available to us. They live in our ventral vagal world. we just don't reach that place as easily, right? So as we begin to have more access to that place, those are the stories we hear. But if we took a moment and listened, we would each hear a story coming from each of our states right now, right? My anxious, my sympathetic often goes to anxious, and my anxious story is about my anxious body story is about not feeling comfortable in my clothes at the moment, right? And so then I go to a whole story, and you probably can go there with me, right? That it becomes this big thing. My dorsal despairing story is to, give up. Nothing's ever going to change. You're never going to be the person you want. You're never going to look the way you want, right? And that can go down a deep hole, right? My ventral story at the moment, if I can come to ventral, my ventral story is, I got to reach my ventral story. My ventral story at the moment is, you're 71 years old and you are who you are, and it's okay, right? But see, it even took me a moment to reach that ventral story, because the others are so powerful, and we live in them so often because we get into that place. Yeah.
And we don't even, I think that the big thing is that we're in those places, but the most powerful thing is that we don't realize that it's there. It's subconscious. So we subconsciously move through the world in a way that where we are limiting ourselves and depressing ourselves in whichever myriad ways, and not even aware of it. So it's really, we need to tune into ourselves to even start to hear or realize what we're doing to ourselves.
And remember, your nervous system is doing that because it feels you are in danger if you do something different. So we want to bring that appreciation to the fact that my nervous system keeps me feeling like I'm not okay. I'm not good enough. I'm not okay. I need to do, because it worries that if it doesn't bring me that motivation, I will just collapse and not do anything. Right. So again, when we look to the reason why the nervous system is doing it, as Steve was saying, not just change it, but look to the reason why, we learn so much.
It's getting to that root, which I think we're saying is often the base of which is that little T trauma or trauma. It's not the event, it's the processing of that event or lack thereof that is then creating that. So would you say that going back, becoming aware, then going back and learning to connect those dots of where that internal dialogue started?
It is interesting to think, so does this feel familiar? Yes. Can I go back and think of other times? And sometimes we can go back to like, oh yeah, it began. I would ask some clients, I've been doing this forever. Or, oh no, it started when, and they'll give you a moment. So you you take a moment and you see a pattern. That's what we're looking at, patterns in the nervous system, this moment, and then how does it fit into a pattern? We think about the ways our nervous systems are shaped by the cultures, the environments, the families, the homes we grow up in. You begin to think, oh, it makes sense. Makes sense that my nervous system goes to hopelessness most often. That's where it goes first. Makes sense because in my home, that was the safe place. It was safer for me to be invisible than it was to be someone who got really big and, loud, right? Which would have been a sympathetic, angry, anxious. And I think we begin to understand and say, well, that makes sense. It helps us create a more coherent life story, right? And bring the moments in.
And finally, to ask if it was standard practice in medicine to acknowledge the role of the vagus nerve and polyvagal theory in treating patients, what would it look like in terms of people's emotional and physical health in their daily lives?
We use a term called polyvagal informed or polyvagal informed care. And what that really means is the awareness of the patient or the client. If medicine were more aware of the client's physiological state, it would be delivered in a totally different way. And what a term I use, and this is actually a true story, I had interviewed for a major position, administrative position at the National Institutes of Health, and was during the interview with the director, I was telling him what I thought medicine should be. Not a good thing to do. I was telling him that medicine, we knew too much about the body to allow medicine to be practiced the way it was. We needed to recruit the patient's nervous system as a collaborator on a shared journey of healing. He didn't have a clue of what I was talking about. And that is what I think polyvagal informed medical care would be. You're in a collaboration with the client, ensuring you're creating that co-regulation with the client. You're listening to the client and allowing the client to be heard. Now, we've been talking for over an hour, and a lot of this was really your focus of your podcast is really, in a sense, on women's issues. Women have not been heard. This is an important, not only women, many people, many men. So we talk about marginalized populations and not, what are we really saying? They haven't been heard. And what does that mean in terms of their physiology? It means they don't feel safe. When we say you don't feel safe, what does it mean about the vagus? It means the vagus can't be allowed to do much regulation, because if you're not safe, you need to have access to your defenses to get out of there or to protect yourself. Your body is doing the best it can for you in that context. So the whole issue of being marginalized is really telling the vagus and that component, especially the ventral vagus, we can't allow you, the ventral vagus, to do what you can do. We can't allow your body to be safe, because if you give up your defenses, you're going to be injured. And now if we go back to your points about small t and big T, what did the body learn? The body learned that it was vulnerable. It learned that it can't give up its defenses. And now we see this whole profile of so many people in our society as living in a physiological state of defensiveness. And that's measurable. Except in a medical environment, which was your question, that's not what they're measuring. They're measuring blood samples. You go through the battery. They're not saying, well, let's do a simple test. Let's have you walk around and sit down. Something as simple as that. Let's see how long it takes your heart rate to come down. Let's look at the underlying neural regulation. So let's kind of find out how efficient and effective your vagal system is and can be recruited to do the work of calming. No one asks that question, actually not in medicine. So what is the future? The future of a polyvagal-informed medical practice is one to respect the physiological state the individual is in, and to realize that all forms of intervention, whether it's medicine, surgery, or mental health, is going to be mediated or influenced by the physiological state you're in. The physiological state can either be welcoming to the treatment or defensive to it as well. And the job is to recruit the patient's nervous system as a collaborator through trust and interaction.
Yeah, that is beautiful. And I think for me, if I'm a medical provider, the state of my nervous system is the most important thing, because I am sending either a warning to my patient's nervous system or a welcome. And if I'm not sending a welcome, I cannot work with.
So interesting, because functional medicine, I think, is so wonderful and a direction that medicine really needs to go into. Yet what is so dichotomous, or just absolutely doesn't track for me, is that you have functional medicine doctors that are doing it via Zoom.
Well, it's not only that, we can go one step further, but also the focus in functional medicine is still assessments. Except it's not neural. It tends to be a lot of more biochemical assessment, but not nervous. I mean, it's getting at, the issue is when you go neural, you're looking at dynamic regulation. When you're doing these other assessments, there's an assumption of a static level issue. And if you have level issues, you can kind of remediate that through supplements or through other methods.
Thank you both so, so much for this conversation. And I am so confident that this is really going to open the eyes and change the reality for a lot of women who are listening, to understand what's going on and where they can start to heal, so that they're no longer dealing with just the symptoms, and can get to the root cause, so that those symptoms are no longer interrupting their daily lives. Thank you both so much for the work that you do and for sharing it with me and with us. And it was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.